Imagine this, you're barely a teenager. You're sitting at school, bored out of your mind when your friends introduce you to a game where you literally click a cube to the rhythm of music. That's it, no guns, no open world, no complicated mechanics, just a cube. And somehow, you become addicted. At first, you're just like everyone else. You can't get past the same parts, you die on the easiest jumps, and eventually you start blaming the game for your own mistakes. But then you get better. You beat a level that you couldn't beat before, then another one, and another. Eventually, you start playing harder and harder levels until one day you realize that you're actually pretty good at this game. So you start grinding. You switch from phone to PC, you start playing demons, and suddenly you're spending hours practicing levels that look completely impossible to anyone who doesn't play Geometry Dash. Then people start noticing you. Your completions get hundreds of thousands of views. You get recognized in the community. You start verifying huge projects, and eventually, you're one of the best players in the entire game. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, not really, because being a top Geometry Dash player comes with a ridiculous amount of problems that you don't really think about until you're actually there. So let's go through some of the biggest problems that come with being one of the best players in Geometry Dash. First problem is the skill gap. Let's start with something that isn't talked about enough. Not everyone improves at the same rate. You can have two players practicing the exact same level for the exact same amount of time, and one of them might make way more progress. And when you're trying to reach the very top, that difference matters a lot. A good modern example is Zoink. By the time Zoink was competing seriously at the highest level, and after that, Geometry Dash had already reached a point where the hardest levels were completely ridiculous. And somehow he was still able to keep up with and eventually surpass some of the best players in the world. But obviously, being naturally good doesn't mean you can just open the game and magically beat a top 1. You still have to put in an insane amount of time. The difference is that some players get more out of that time than others. One person might spend 20,000 attempts on a level and barely improve. Another player can spend 20,000 attempts and become consistent enough to actually finish it. And when you're competing against people who are already insanely good, even a tiny difference can matter. Because at the top level, you're not competing against some random guy who plays after school. You're competing against people who have spent years on this game. And sometimes being just a little bit better is the difference between being the player everyone talks about and being the guy who is also really good. Second problem is the grind. And this is where the game starts becoming less fun. Because once you're at the top, you can't just casually play Geometry Dash anymore. You have to grind. Probably one of the best current examples of this is Doggy and Grief. Doggy has been working on Grief for almost 2 years. He's put more than 340,000 attempts into the level, and he still hasn't verified it. At this point, Grief isn't just a Geometry Dash level. It's basically a second job, except your coworkers are YouTube commenters asking when you're going to finish, and that pressure has clearly started to affect him. Doggy has talked about feeling stuck, not making the progress he wants, and losing motivation to keep playing. He also talked about how he doesn't even enjoy playing the level anymore.
I feel like I'm like stuck in terms of progress. I mean, I can't really make much progress, and I feel like I'm being held back, like mentally, but also physically. I just feel like I'm not as good as I could be whenever I'm playing, and I kind of just lost a little bit of like motivation because I don't know when I'm gonna progress. Like, when the fuck is that gonna happen? Oh yeah, and then I hate playing it now, like more than ever before. All that piled on top of each other, I would start to think like, what if I do drop it? What happens next? I realized that I can't do that.
And honestly, that's probably one of the worst things that can happen, because at some point you stop playing because you wanna and start playing because you feel like you have to. One of the most ridiculous examples is Nobble's verification of Bloodlust. He spent around a year and a half working on the level and accumulated more than 120,000 attempts. Just think about that for a second. 120,000 attempts. Most people would probably quit after 5,000. At 20,000, I'd already be questioning my life choices. And after spending that much time on one level, you'd expect the completion to be one of the greatest achievements of all time. And it was. But then something happened that makes the whole thing even crazier. Scullo beat Bloodlust only around 2 weeks later. So imagine spending a year and a half verifying something, and then someone else comes along and beats it in 2 weeks. That's not even an insult to Nobble's, it's actually the opposite. It shows just how ridiculous the difference between top players can be. Dedication is obviously important. If you don't practice, you're not going to beat the hardest levels. But dedication alone doesn't guarantee that you'll become the best. And this is something that comes up again and again in the history of Geometry Dash. The next problem is comparison. Unless you're the undisputed best player in the world, there's almost always someone you can be compared to. You beat a top 10? Cool. This guy beat a top 5. You beat a top 5? Yeah, but this guy beat the top 1. You beat the top 1? Okay, but he did it in fewer attempts. You could literally beat the hardest level in the game and someone would still find a way to turn it into a leaderboard argument. And that's because Geometry Dash is an incredibly competitive game. People care about rankings, list points, attempts, hardest completions, records. Basically everything can be compared, and the higher you climb, the worse it gets. Take the current generation of top players. Players like Zoink and Popoff are already ridiculously good, but even being at that level doesn't mean you're safe from comparison. There's always another player. If Zoink beats a new top 1, people aren't going to talk about it forever. Eventually someone else will beat it. Then someone will beat it with fewer attempts. Then someone younger will come along and start beating levels that took Zoink months to learn. That's just how the game works. And honestly, imagine being Zoink. You're one of the best players in the world. You've beaten levels that most players will never even get past 20% on. And somewhere on Twitter or Discord, there's probably already a 13-year-old saying, "I am better than Zonk." If you were Zoink, how are you going to feel? Next problem is physical problems. Your hands are not exactly designed for this. After years of playing Geometry Dash at a high level, some players develop finger, wrist, or joint problems. Riot is one example. He eventually reduced his activity partly because of finger pain. Zobros also experienced serious finger pain. It got to the point where during one of the creator contests, he had to play auto versions of the submitted levels instead of actually playing them. Eventually, he stepped away from the game for years. And this is something that doesn't really get talked about when people look at the demon list. You see the completion, you see the attempts, you see the percentage counter. You don't see what the player's hand feels like after doing the same input for the 500th time. And there's another problem. You can't necessarily stay at your peak forever. Geometry Dash requires incredibly fast reactions, precision, and consistency. So even if you've been one of the best players in the world, there's no guarantee you'll still be able to perform at that level years later, and eventually something else can happen. You just stop wanting to. The price of being the best. So when you see a top player beating an insane level, it's easy to think, damn, I wish I was that good. But you don't see what happens behind the completion. The thousands of attempts, the pressure, the comparisons, the burnout. And sometimes the fact that the player doesn't even enjoy the game anymore. Being one of the best is obviously an incredible achievement, but once you reach the top, you have to keep proving that you deserve to stay there, because there's always someone coming up behind you, someone younger, someone faster, someone with more time to grind, and eventually they'll take your place. That's just how Geometry Dash works. Players come and go, records get broken, new players take over, and the cycle starts again. So maybe being a top player doesn't suck because the game is hard. Maybe it sucks because you can never stay at the top forever.